we'll get underway. We're a select, we're a select group tonight.
Select but significant.
Thank you, Rick. Normally we have a few more people, but I rather suspect that the inclement weather has kept some people away. But, as we say, a small select group. Tonight's guest for Seminary Third Age is Rick Sarre. Someone that I know of, not a lot, but I knew that he was someone to do with law and order. So he's adjunct professor of law and criminal justice at UniSA. He's a former legal practitioner and human rights lawyer. He was head of the School of Law and Legal Practice for 6 years, and he's retired as the Dean of the Law School in 2020. So that's quite a list of achievements. Except that you go on now to add that he's enjoyed teaching in America, Hong Kong, and Sweden in the course of his 34 years in the tertiary education sector, and he's a past president of the Australian and New Zealand Society of Criminology and a fellow of the Society. And he's also a member of the Clayton Wesley Uniting Church. So he's a Uniting Church person as well. So who better to talk to us about, on my list it says freedom, discussing freedom in the context of the global pandemic.
I've added a bit about this. The pandemic gets mentioned somewhere.
But here we've got freedoms in the current political and cultural environment, with a slightly theological lens, and we'll touch on the pandemic as well. So what more could you want? So please give as big and warm a welcome as you can.
Well, thank you very much for that very warm welcome. I was in the States some years ago catching a plane, and the announcement came over and said, we are grateful. We know you have a choice of airlines and you've chosen to fly with us. And I'm going to say that same thing tonight. Tonight you have a choice of other things. My wife is listening to Julia Gillard at the moment at the Convention Centre. Also tonight is the play, The Normal Heart, which we saw last weekend. Has anyone seen that? Astonishingly good. It's only on for a couple more nights. In fact, it wasn't full, so it's about the AIDS crisis of the 1980s in New York. It is absolutely brilliant. And then last night, my wife and I went to hear Bill Bailey, the comedian. He's on again tonight. So you've got a choice, and you came here, and I'm grateful for that. So thank you very much. I see a hand.
What about the custodians? Not once each time I come here.
Oh yes, sorry. We should say that. We do. Thank you for reminding me. We do meet on the traditional lands of the Kaurna people, and we respect their spiritual connection with the land, and we acknowledge their spiritual connection today, their elders past, present and emerging. So thank you for my reminder. So tonight I'm going to touch on this particular subject about freedoms. And here we go. I've got a lot of slides, so hopefully this makes sense to you. And I'm going to press here and hope this works. Here we go. But first, 3 current preliminary matters. Now, I was putting this show together over the last few days, and a couple of other things occurred to me that I wanted to mention, but didn't kind of go with the flow of what I wanted to say. So I've got 3 things that I'm going to just present, and then later we might just tie them back into the discussion ahead of the questions that we have. The first one is just to remind you about the Census on religious belief. I presented this to a seminar last week, and no one had seen it. Now, I imagine most of you had a quick look at it. This was released about 2 months ago, and was based upon the census that happens every 5 years. And as you know, we took one in 2021. Here's the refreshing bit of it. That Christianity remains the most common religion in Australia. Catholics still present, this is 18 and above, 20% of the population. Anglicans representing about 10%, and other Christian, including Uniting Church, of course, another 14%, which is all up about 44% of the population still declaring on the census, they're ticking the box that says they are Christian. but down from 52% only 5 years ago. 17% are affiliated with other religions, and in those other religions you can see the ones I'm mentioning there. But somewhat significantly, 39% people are now ticking the box, which has been one of the options in the last two censi, that says no religion. Now, there's a bit of slippage about this, and I want to remind you of the slippage. The slippage is that in that 39%, there'll be a lot of people who will say they are spiritual people, but just don't declare a particular religious affiliation. So it's actually not just people who just have no interest in religion. By the same token, there'll be a lot of people ticking those other boxes of people who actually don't go to church, but are happy to be affiliated with the Catholic Church. So I reckon that kind of rounds it out a little bit. I should say that a year ago, when the census was being taken, in fact I can tell you exactly when it was, because I was sitting with a friend who was dying. In fact, I was doing his will, and because I still do some legal practice, and I thought, well, I'm sitting with him every couple of hours every Wednesday for the last 3 or 4 months of his life. We had coffee, we talked about his life. He was my age, went to school together. And I said, let's do the census. Okay, he said, is it worthwhile? I said, well, you're still alive. Actually, tonight's the census night. You're supposed to do it. You can't get out of it that easily, I said. So we did the census, and we got to the religion question, and I said, what shall I put down for religion? He said, Church of England. I didn't want to tell him they changed their name about 20 years ago. But he hadn't been to the Church of England for 45 years, but he still wanted to get down Church of England on the form. I said, I'll put down Anglican, shall I? Oh yeah, he said, it's a different box. So yes, he'd fall into that one of having no affiliation, but nevertheless having some degree of connection. So, but I think that's just important for us to get some sense, if we're looking at these matters that I'm about to talk about, of where that comes. The second one I want to talk about is the divine right of kings. So we've now got a king. There's some suggestion he might actually, say that he's happy to throw Australia away in terms of the dominion, keeps of the Commonwealth, but that's leaving that to one side. We now have a king, so now all QCs become KCs, just by virtue of the name. The divine right is gone, which you might remember began with the Stuarts, James I in 1603, and sort of carried on for another 100 years. But after 1707, the British monarch, etc., is no longer ruling by divine right, but it did go for 100 years. But however, he, and if any of you watched all the business of having him succeed after his mother died, all of the business about the Church of England indicates he must be an Anglican. In fact, not only must he be an Anglican, he has to be the head of the Anglican Church. He is the kind of the titular head, which means he can't be a Catholic, nor can he be a Jew, Muslim, Sikh, anything else. He can't be an agnostic, he can't be an atheist. And I think that there's a lot of people who have no idea that that is still the case. So our head of state must be an Anglican. Now, we can talk about the Republican issue before we finish tonight if you like, but I just want to remind people who are not aware of this, as no one who heard me speak on this last week had any clue that he was also the head of the Anglican Church, which sort of puts a bit of a hole in the idea of hanging on to the monarchy. And the last thing I want to mention, last weekend I was reading the Weekend Australian, and here is a former member of the judiciary, now retired, Lord Jonathan Sumption, in the Weekend Australian just last week, talking on these matters of freedom. And I thought, this is interesting. He's a bit more conservative than I am, but I thought I would say, summarise a bit about what he was saying, which I thought was interesting. And again, I'll tie this back into what we're talking about the rest of the night. Western democracies are now facing relative economic decline, capricious patterns of inequality, often due to faltering expectations and fear. We're in a different world than we were 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, in terms of these expectations. With COVID, with the world recession coming, global growth slowing down, makes you think it's a good idea, but nevertheless, the bottom line is people are fearful of the future. He says, we blame government, but the more we blame the government, the more we're tacitly agreeing with their responsibility to wield more power over us. So we actually blame the government, so the government does something more. Typically that takes away our freedoms. We blame those who disagree with us as well. There's no longer shades of grey. According to advocates, their view is the only legitimate one. Those who oppose them are cancelled to observe bullying and disruption. We seem to be going through a bifurcation. You're either there or you're not. You're either with us or you're against us. People are taking their sides, left, right and right out there, far more vociferously than they have in the past, or certainly not since the 1960s. And that's a worrying trend, he says. The result is the abandonment of political and democratic engagement. That's where I want to talk tonight about this democratic engagement and where the freedoms come into it. We can toss this around and have some questions at the end to see whether in fact I've got this thesis right. But here's what he said. I thought it was interesting, just as a way of putting this in context. Quote, "The transition from democracy to authoritarian rule," which he is thinking we're going down that particular path right across the world, is deceptively smooth. The question whose values are to prevail can be resolved only by the crude exercise of power by the dominant ideology. Will democracy resist these pressures in the next century, meaning this century? A generation ago it would have seemed strange to even ask the question. Today it's a real issue. So I thought that was apposite for us to look in the context of freedoms, that there seems to be a trend around the world in relation to Xi Jinping, in relation to Putin, in relation to Bolsonaro, in relation to Duterte, all these countries heading down a more authoritarian path. Even the whole idea of the Trumpian view of the world has given us some indication that we're really not a democratic world anymore. Well, how do we make sure we get the freedoms installed and still have that democratic ability to discuss and debate and hold on to ideologies but be open to the ideologies of others? So that's where I want to go tonight. And does religion, does theology help us in that particular role? That's where I want to talk in the next half an hour or so. Let's see how we go. So, freedoms in our democratic life together. I want to hang on to these democratic freedoms. How do we do that? We have to understand them first. So I want to look at 4 of them tonight. The freedom of association, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, and freedom of religious belief. I'm going to spend about 3 minutes on the first 3 and the rest of the evening on the last one, because it's the one that's the most pressing at the moment in terms of where we are, of course, in this building as well, where we are in relation to our religious beliefs. So that's what I want to do. So let's talk quickly about freedom of association. Freedom of association has been rendered virtually obsolete by recent decisions by the High Court under the principle of legality. Let me put on my law hat for a moment and tell you what this means. We've never really had freedom of association, not since going back to the 1980s, when people who were, actually 1970s, beginning here in South Australia and around the country, when all of a sudden governments got sick of people blocking intersections, particularly in relation to the Vietnam War and the moratorium. Some of you may have been around in those days.
Yes.
And thereafter, there seems to have reached a particular accord that if you are going to have a demonstration, you've got to get the police on side, otherwise there'll be massive arrest. There's no such thing as civil disobedience. Now, is that a good thing? Bad thing? We can sort of think about that. But at the moment, of course, Bjelke-Petersen brought the same thing in, that you had to get permission from Bjelke-Petersen to have any sort of march. That was a lot tougher here. South Australia, we seem to have done it pretty well. If you want to organise a march, the police will get on board and you'll have your march. You just can't do it spontaneously. In any event, freedom of association took a rough and tumble as a result of those particular decisions from the 1970s and 1980s. And then in the 2010-2012 period, we had a crackdown on bikies. And bikies, they're just pretty bad things, but the crackdown was, in every state, we brought out this so-called SOCOG laws, serious and organised crime laws. But the idea was that if you're a member of a bikie organisation, you couldn't meet more than 3 people, otherwise you'd be arrested. And they challenged that all the way through to the High Court. And the High Court, in fact, knocked the government back and said this thing called the principle of legality. You can't infer this. If you're going to do this and challenge the right of an association, you've got to do it so explicitly, so absolutely clearly. But if you do it absolutely clearly, you can get away with it. That's the principle of legality. What you are doing is in the sovereign nation with the power of the parliament to go through the whole process and ban this particular organisation. You can ban any organisation on the basis of that. I mean, not going to get away with it publicly if the organisation's a nice organisation like the Uniting Church. And of course, you might remember we spent a bit more time constitutionally looking back at the time of the attempted banning of the Communist Party, which didn't succeed way back during the course of the Second World War. But leaving that to one side, if you want to ban bikies, you've got to do it clearly. So all the governments around Australia banned bikies from meeting more than 3 persons at a time, and they all succeeded because they had set it out clearly in legislation. It's had the effect of basically breaking bikie gangs, and of course the police think it's a wonderful thing. Every now and again the bikers have run they'll put teddies on the back of their bikes and do a teddy run or something, and they get away with that. But the bottom line is bikie gangs have basically been broken by the principle of legality. And essentially it's because it's clear, and the High Court said there's no real such thing as a freedom of association anymore. So, has that been a good thing? Well, I got rid of bikies, but maybe there's some lessons to be learned there about the way in which government has to be responsible for that particular choice. Right, what about freedom to move around? Very similar to the freedom of association, and we saw during COVID, and that's why I've got a picture of Bunnings there, freedom to move around under lockdown has been made difficult, especially on private premises, where the law of property and the law of contract apply, where public safety and commercial safety, including worker safety, were paramount. So we had legislation coming from the parliaments which gave power to the executive to declare whether or not you could move around. And if lockdown said you couldn't be out, you could be arrested. It was pretty horrendous stuff. And so basically, against the principle, again, the principle of legality applied to say that if the law is clear enough and the public safety is obvious enough, which one would argue it was during the whole lockdown experience, by virtue of trying to defeat the COVID until we got the vaccinations organised, and public safety was at risk, and private premises could then say, you're not going to come in without a mask, or you're not going to come in at all, or you're not going to come in without a vaccination, because we have determined that that is what other customers want you to have, and that's the best way of protecting our workplace. And that law of contract, and that law of property, and that law of employment law prevailed. It basically said there is no such thing as the freedom to move around at whim, ever again, until such time as the government says it's okay. So again, it's one of those, you want that freedom to move around and do whatever you like, but the government has now said if the principle of legality is there and the executive power under the parliament, which of course is subject to the election, and let's see what happens to Dan Andrews, who was the great lockdown king. He's coming up for election in the next month or so. They're all saying he's going to win. So maybe the parliament was the place for that to happen, and maybe the people thought, well, maybe in terms of people's safety, what he did was correct. But again, don't think there's some absolute right of freedom to move around. Freedom of speech during the pandemic was tightly monitored. You knew I'd get back to the pandemic, didn't you? That was part of it. During the pandemic was tightly monitored by legislative and executive action, given the mischief that unbridled speech may have caused. That was the idea that you couldn't, or you could be shut down if what you were saying conspiracy-wise, that somehow or other the whole COVID thing was a QAnon, it was a fallacy, and it was just a way of ensuring that world government would come to Australia, etc., etc. So now all of those theories were shut down. So our freedom of speech was somewhat bridled at that point. But that's not unusual. And the next slide, I point out, as I do in my freedom of speech lectures, and some of you may have heard me give this one in the past, of the ways in which our speech actually is fairly heavily constrained. In any event, our freedom of speech is constrained by many non-controversial ways, by laws such as a ban on hate speech, fair enough. Holocaust denial, fair enough. Juror revelations, you can't talk about what you heard in the jury room. Suppression orders, you can't breach a suppression order. Defamatory speech, that's a whole new discussion. Discriminatory speech, seditious speech that threatens safety and security in wartime or faced with terrorism. Limits on pornographic material and speech that may defeat privacy expectations. So I just say that anyone who says we have absolute freedom of speech, that's simply not the case. We don't. We have a whole range of constraints. And during the course of COVID, during the pandemic, that was extended somewhat. I think we're okay now. Sort of opened up that door again. But again, in an authoritarian time, under an authoritarian non-democratic institution, those freedoms would again be constrained. So those are those three: association, freedom of movement, and freedom of speech. They're all constrained. For the most part, we think that our Parliament probably gets it right, and if they don't get it right, we'll vote them out at the next election. So that's where we are in relation to those three. I now want to talk about freedom of religious belief. And I'm saying here, it's protected by section 116 of the Constitution, isn't it? Question mark. The answer is sort of. Sort of. Why do I say sort of? Let's have a look at section 116. The Commonwealth shall not make any law for establishing any religion or for imposing any religious observance or for prohibiting the free exercise of any religion, and no religious test shall be required as a qualification for any office or public trust under the Commonwealth. I simply point out that actually it doesn't say it very clearly, and in layperson's terms, this next slide explains it. So, does it separate church and state? Yes, such that no religion can demand the state act in a certain way, which of course is one of the reasons why a lot of people left and fled out of Europe in the 17th and 18th centuries. But no, insofar as religions are protected from interference from the state. In other words, we don't have a strict separation of state and church because the church needs the state. Otherwise, it simply couldn't exist. Remember also that Section 116 doesn't apply to state legislation, it's only a Commonwealth dictate. Now, and you're going to say, well, Rick, what does that actually mean? So this next little bit, before we actually get down to the Religious Discrimination Bill, we're getting there. I'm taking you somewhere through, and some of you may have heard me give this lecture before, where Section 116 looks like it separates church and state. I'm going to give you 8 reasons why there is a massive connection between church and state. I'm going to reach the conclusion that one can't do without the other. Here we go. Section 116 talks obliquely about separation of state and religion. There are significant ways in which our political structures and laws are linked to religion, and vice versa. This will be a shock to some of you, I'm sure. 8 of them. Number 1, the National School Chaplaincy Program provides funding for state schools to employ a chaplain. There we go. Number 2, there's state funding for religious schools. It continues unabated. I put up there the so-called DOGS case. DOG was Defence of Government Schools, DOGS, and they challenged about 20 years ago the idea that there should be public funding for religious schools. That was Section 116 says you can't have religious schools getting public funding, taxpayer funding, and the High Court said yes they can. It's all about education, and you couldn't stop state and Commonwealth funding of religious schools using state taxpayers' money. The teaching of creationism and other religious truths occurs in some independent religiously based schools without challenge from the state. Now, there is a rider to that. You can't just teach creation. You've got to teach the curriculum. But you can also teach some other things that some of us might want to think are a little bit weird. That, the earth was created 5,000 years ago or whatever. So the bottom line is, there is a freedom of some religiously based schools to teach a curriculum that you and I might think is a bit bizarre. However, they must teach the curriculum, but they can do these add-ons without interference from the state. Okay, number 4, religions regularly work in league with governments. 66%, I'm told, of government welfare payments, other than pensions, are outsourced through the religious sector. 66% of government funds are siphoned through the religious sector, principally through volunteerism, but also paying a lot of people who are also affiliated with churches. So there's a kind of a symbiotic relationship there. The government simply couldn't get those funds out under their own steam, so they pay religions to do it for them. And the religions are quite happy to do that because, after all, they're looking after the welfare of the population, which is, of course, what religions are supposed to be doing. So there's a nice little hand-in-hand arrangement there. Number 5, there are tax benefits for any organisation set up for the advancement of religion. Donors have deductibility for charitable donations such as the alleviation of poverty and educational purposes, which is what a lot of churches do. I should add that my mate Neville Rocco, KC, has already taped a program with 60 Minutes as a former Mormon person in charge of finances, saying the Mormons have wrought at this for a long time, using Mormon money, siphoning it off back to Utah, having taken it for the elimination of poverty and educational purposes. So watch this space in relation to 60 Minutes. But leaving that to one side, churches are given massive deductions for tax deductions on the basis of things they're doing in their own educational and charitable space. Number 6, there are no council or property rates for churches or church-owned buildings. That's a nice little benefit, isn't it? Number 7, Australian parliamentary parties, and by extension our parliaments, allowed, some of them are gone, conscience votes on issues such as abortion, assisted dying, stem cell research for discarded human embryos, prostitution and same-sex marriage, all based on principles drawn from religious precepts. So conscience votes, we still have conscience votes, particularly rigorously adhered to in the Labor Party, but no one blinks an eyelid Oh, I can't vote for that, says Tom Koutsantonis, because of my background in the Greek Orthodox Church. I can't vote for abortion reform. Oh, that's all right. After all, you've got that religious belief. So again, that sort of thing would never occur in a strict separation of church and state. And the last one, Christian prayers. Some of you people, I give this lecture, people say, wait a minute, that can't possibly be the case. Christian prayers are offered at the beginning of each day of sitting, including the Anglican, not the Catholic version, Lord's Prayer. The Catholic version always stops a bit short. Some of you may know that that's probably once. I'm sure Norm can help me here. Once from Luke and once from Matthew or something. And I think the Anglicans added the benediction bit to it a lot longer after. The Catholics are actually right, aren't they, Norm? Yes, I think they are. But we have the Anglican one, the Anglican Lord's Prayer. Is that a fair call? Yeah. An Anglican Lord's Prayer at the beginning of every parliamentary day. Attempts to make this a little more multi-faith oriented have failed. No parliamentarian wants to be seen to be non-Christian. Some of you may know that Bob Brown, on a half a dozen occasions when he was in the Senate, which would be some 20 years ago, didn't want to get rid of some sort of numinous exercise at the beginning of the parliamentary day. He just wanted to make it a bit more multi-faith. Say, we all come here, perhaps in the indigenous spirituality and others, recognising our multi-faith. Let's all have a minute's silence. No, he couldn't even get that through. It had to be the Anglican Lord's Prayer, and it had to be the vouchsafe prayer that we hear of every parliament on every day of sitting, state, federal and territory. Now, I'm not criticising that. I suppose I am criticising it. I think we should have a multi-faith reflection at the beginning of every day of Parliament. In fact, an Indigenous recognition of every day of Parliament. But the idea of having an Anglican prayer still, and that can't shift and budge because no one wants to do it. Otherwise, they'd be land-based in the polls. Although, with only, I come back to that point, with only, what was it?
Condition.
What did I say? It was 48% of people now recognising, whatever the figure was, I've forgotten my own figure now. Less than 52% anyway, people who are recognising their religious or Christian roots. You'd think they'd be the first people to say, well, we live in a multi-faith organisation. So I say it's a symbiotic relationship. The church cannot do without the state, and the state cannot do without the church. Does that make any sense? I mean, that's a revelation to a lot of people. A revelation to a lot of people. When we talk about church and state, section 116, it doesn't guarantee anything at all. Right, I'm conscious of my time here, and I want to spend maybe another 15 or 20 minutes just looking at this whole religious discrimination bill and reaching a conclusion that some of you might find is a little unusual. Here we go. That's a picture I took, by the way, in Malta. I was at a conference in Malta. That's watching the sun come up. My mother saw that and said, what were you doing with the sun coming up? Surely that's the sun going down. I said, I was out for a morning jog. So there you go. Right, here we go. The main issue with religious discrimination is with schools. The background. Religious schools have benefited from exemptions to equal opportunity laws, allowing them to refuse to employ staff or accept students based on their sexuality or gender identity if this was contrary to the ethos of the school. Campaigns to strengthen a school's religious freedoms intensified following the marriage equality debate and legislation in 2017. This really wasn't on the radar until 2017. At the time, when the debate began, a lot of people were pointing out the fact that Labor had actually overseen so many of these exemptions for schools to do their own religious thing. But no one ever really thought about it. Suddenly the whole same-sex marriage came along and people started questioning just where religions could have some part to play in the way in which certain things played out, particularly among schools and religiously based orders. Let me just say something very quickly while I have a glass of water here about the same-sex marriage debate, which some of you may not remember. But I'll refresh your memories because I was very much associated with it at the time. John Howard, as you know, came to power in 1996, all the way through to about 2007. In 2002, 2003, he got wind of this idea that same-sex marriage was on the radar. In fact, I remember distinctly in the early 2000s with the Labor Party in opposition going a bit soft on this. I was expecting Julia Gillard, who's speaking the other side of town tonight, to actually kind of come out in favour of same-sex marriage. Do you remember she didn't touch it, did not touch it? Why not? Because there are a whole bunch of seats in Western Sydney who would have just abandoned her with a flick of their fingers. Basically, she couldn't touch this because of those polls being taken in those Western Sydney electorates, which the Labor Party needed, not just her, but other Labor leaders as well. The Labor Party needed in order to win government in 2007, and they were going nowhere in relation to that. So they were very, very soft on same-sex marriage. John Howard got wind of this, and he looked at the Marriage Act. Now, I looked at the Marriage Act because I used to teach family law. The Marriage Act was talking about what you had to say in a religious service to make sure that you're in accordance with the law. And those of you who actually do have ability, either as ordained ministers or civil celebrants, you have to have the parties at some point during the course of religious, not any sort of religious, or any sort of marriage, I should say. They have to say three things. I better get them right. It has to be to the exclusion of all others, voluntarily entered into for life. Those three things come out of the Marriage Act. The person getting married has to be for life, to the exclusion of all others, and has to be voluntary. Otherwise, it's not a valid marriage in Australia. It says nothing about male and female. John Howard got wind of this, and you might remember it was back in about 2001, 2002. He passed an amendment saying marriage is between a man and a woman, and all the celebrants had to say that somewhere in their marriage. I declare, by virtue of what I'm told now as a marriage celebrant, is between a man and a woman, voluntarily entered into the exclusion of all others for life. And that was actually part and parcel of what the law then said. So what they did in 2017 was simply to remove man and a woman. Why wasn't it there prior to 2002? Because everyone assumed it was going to be a man and a woman. No one ever thought about anything else. It was always going to be a man and a woman. So John Howard was shoring it up in 2017 with the marriage equality legislation championed by Malcolm Turnbull. And in fact, I was in the chamber that day. It was December the 12th or something, 2017. I happened to be in Parliament. No, I happened to be in Canberra. My wife rang and said, get over to Parliament, they're debating it now. I jumped in the taxi, got to Parliament, inveigled my way into the public gallery, which was chock-a-block full, and watched the last 2 hours of the debate. And of course they called the debate, and those of you who remember that, two people sort of scurried out of the room. I think Tony Abbott might have been one of them, leaving two blokes, sitting there somewhat defiantly on the nay benches, while everyone else shuffled across. And there was Christopher Pine chatting to Mark Butler. They were slapping each other on the back of the shoulders. It was kind of fun to watch that. On the big day, Malcolm Turnbull still says it was his finest parliamentary moment. Okay, I'm getting completely off the track here, but basically the bottom line was it was the marriage equality stuff in 2017 that suddenly emboldened the government to say, wait a minute, let's kind of shore this up. So Philip Ruddock was appointed. I think some of you would have met with Philip Ruddock. You would have met on the Ruddock Inquiry when he's looking at religious freedom. There was a Uniting Church group that was actually put in there. I don't know about the Lutherans, but certainly I went in with the Uniting Church to talk to the Ruddock Inquiry about how best to frame religious freedom. The Ruddock Inquiry came back a year later with Frank Brennan and others having put this particular case together with the idea of how religious freedom could play out. All a bit of background. This was at the very time that there was another very famous thing happening. In 2019, Israel Folau, the rugby player, put out that little thing on his Facebook page. Warning, drunks, homosexuals, adulterers, liars, fornicators, thieves, atheists, watch out there, and idolaters, hell awaits you, repent, only Jesus saves. Now at the time, he was employed by the National Rugby League, or whatever they're called up in Queensland, and they said, sorry mate, you're out. We have to dismiss you because you've now stepped outside of what it is that you're supposed to be championing in terms of diversity. So the debate was further inflamed by the 2019 sacking of Israel Folau for posting on social media inflammatory comments about gay people. That was the big one. Most people could say, oh, well, drunks and adulterers and liars and fornicators, who cares about them? But when it said homosexuals, that was the one that now went against the equal opportunity legislation, essentially because equal opportunity legislation protects people against discrimination on the basis of sexuality. In line with his view of his Christian faith, which is not my view of his Christian faith, but that's not my view. I have a Christian faith, but I don't have that particular Christian faith. He sued the rugby league for now dismissing him and taking away his right to earn his income, and he won. The restraint clause says you must not make inflammatory comments and bring the rugby league into disrepute, was unreasonable and thus invalid. The fallout was the impact against the bill was significant. So it had the effect of saying, for all right-minded people, who would include every person in this room, I'm sure, and all the right-minded people amongst Christian groups, saying, wait a minute, if this religious freedom bill comes about, this is going to give the Israel Falaus of the world open slather to get stuck into gay people. This is just not on. If this is the effect of what this religious freedom bill is all about, there's got to be something wrong with it. So in fact, Israel Folau, I think, did us all a favour in terms of saying, wait a minute, there's something a bit weird about this. And to that extent, have a look at this particular study. The 2022 Australian Cooperative Election Study asked this particular question. This is 2022, it's just ahead of the election this year. Should religious schools be able to refuse to employ staff based on their sexual orientation? The yes vote is only 15%. In other words, a real softening, saying, wait a minute, you just can't allow a school or someone to knock someone on the head because they're expressing homosexuality. Should religious schools be able to refuse to employ staff based on their transgender identity? Yes, 16%. There were similar margins when asking whether religious schools should be able to exclude students based on their sexual orientation or their transgender identity. There is now a considerable negative attitude to religious freedoms being given air. In other words, people, I think, are saying, wait a minute, if this is the effect of religious freedom legislation and it's going to give air to bigotry and anti-gay sentiment or any sort of hate speech in relation to sexuality or the other things that Israel Folau said, that's not on. So all of a sudden people started saying, well, religious freedom sounds like a good thing, but wait a minute, we're now being alluded to the fact there might be a downside to this. So, in the midst of all of this, and based upon the report from Philip Ruddock back to the party, the Porter-Morrison bill was born. It went through a couple of iterations. In 2019 and again in 2021. They sort of had a go in 2019 and then kind of rephrased it in 2021. The Morrison and Porter drafted a religious freedoms bill based on election promise to override state and territory laws. Interestingly, they'd be using Section 116 of the Constitution to protect statements of belief made by individuals, including schools and workplaces, in accordance with doctrines, tenets, beliefs and teachings of their religion. So the idea was that they were going to draft this particular religious discrimination bill and put it up before the Parliament. The idea being that people needed to have a bit more expressive beliefs about how it is they wanted to profess their religion. But there was a key distinction here, and full marks to Christian Porter for making this distinction. And here was the distinction. Attorney General Porter avoided the idea of legislating a right for a religious person to engage actively expressing their religious views without fear of prosecution, in other words, a sword, and chose instead to protect against discrimination on the basis of religious belief and religious practices, a shield, which would have the effect of protecting religiously oriented people from discrimination and or vilification. So he had a choice. He could have said, if you're religiously expressing a religious view, you've got carte blanche, because that's your religion, away you go, and you won't be prosecuted for that. You'll have a defence against anyone coming at you because you're expressing a religious view without being challenged by anyone. He resisted that. Of course he was going to resist that. That was never going to fly. But he did say there are a lot of people who express a religious view who need to be protected from being discriminated on the basis of that view or being vilified on the basis of that view, which would protect Muslims, Sikhs, Christians, anyone who's expressing a view who's about to be vilified on the basis of how they're dressed, what they're eating, and presumably what their attitudes are, so long as they're not publicly expressed vilifying attitudes. So to the extent that they were trying desperately to get a religious discrimination bill that didn't give carte blanche, but protected people from being vilified on the basis of their religious beliefs. And to that extent, I thought, okay, this is probably okay. What do the commentators say about that version of the bill? It didn't get a good rap from most people. The Law Council of Australia, it could still legalise offensive views. Okay. The Human Rights Law Centre, the bill overrides state and territory protections without discrimination. Protection against discrimination. Professor George Williams, probably the best constitutional lawyer in Australia, religious communication has been elevated to a privileged position above other forms of non-religious communication. The National Secular Lobby, well, you can predict what they're going to say. The bill allows a soft theocracy, another bad term, where secular anti-discrimination law will be used to privilege religious belief. Okay. And Catholic Archbishop of Melbourne, Peter Comensoli, who was in the press just the other day saying something, the bill should have taken a positive sword approach, which is the one that they resisted, to rights recognition, not an exemption approach, not that protection approach. So a sword, not a shield. So he was very angry that they hadn't gone down that particular path. So the bill is getting hit from the left and the right. In other words, not pleasing anyone at all. So what happened then? Dissent in the ranks. In February of this year, 5 moderate MPs from the Liberal Party crossed the floor, because the Libs can do that. In the Labor Party, you cross the floor, you're dead. There's only one thing worse than crossing the floor in the Labor Party, and that's death. And I said that once, and someone else said, no, the Labor Party will get you and torture you first. So you can't cross the floor, otherwise you have to leave the Labor Party, unless it's a conscience vote, but leave that to one side. So the 5 MPs, moderate Liberal MPs, crossed the floor, so no consequence for them. When the matter came to the House of Reps, they objected to the bill's protections for potentially anti-LGBTIQ plus commentary because they didn't have an accompanying commitment to protect transgender children from exclusion from schools. Presumably, had they put that in, the MPs wouldn't have crossed the floor. The bill was also doomed to fail in the Senate. The bill was thus shelved. It's not been resurfaced since the election of the Albanese government in May 2022 and doesn't look like it's going to be. It's just too hard. And no one is pushing the Labor Party to do it. In fact, no one's kind of saying much about it at all at the moment because it kind of got a stalemate. And when you get 5 Liberal MPs saying what's been put up just doesn't fly. And remember, it was only a promise ahead of the 2019 election that Scott Morrison was putting it up in the first place at all, because he wanted to, fulfil that particular promise that he would put a bill before the Parliament. Well, he put a bill before the Parliament, and it got shot down even before it was sent off to the Senate. It actually got shot down even before it was voted on in the Parliament. Once they saw those 5 MPs about to cross the floor, or crossing the floor, the whole thing went into abeyance. So, what do we do now with this religious freedom? Where's it going to go? What's happening with all that? On the one hand, we value the freedom of religious belief found in Article 18 of the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, which Australia has signed. Here's what Article 18 says. Everyone shall have the right to freedom of thought, conscience and religion. Oh, there you go. This right shall include the freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice. Don't worry about the gender-specific language. This goes back to 76. And freedom, either individually or in community with others, and in public or private, to manifest his religion or belief in worship, observance, practice and teaching. No one shall be subject to coercion which would impair his freedom to have or to adopt a religion or belief of his choice. So we've signed on to that. And in fact, you would actually use that in order to bolster the federal government's ability to pass laws which they could call the religious discrimination law. On the other hand, a person who might be made vulnerable by that freedom of someone expressing the views like Israel Folau has every right not to be humiliated or treated with disrespect and to expect the law to intervene in the event that they are. So, gee whiz, both of those are good arguments. We've signed on to this thing saying everyone should have the right to have their religion. By the same token, we can't allow people to express their religion in the same way Israel Folau did, even though he's an idiot. And we could probably think, oh, well, that's all right. But what about schools who start saying we don't want any LGBTIQ students here? What about schools and employment places? So I'm sorry, but if you talk about gender equality, we can't employ you. Does that fly in a 21st century polity? The answer is no. But what do you do? How do you enforce that? So here's my view of the goal. To have in place laws and administrative principles that avoid the spectre of religious observance being pilloried, okay, I want to protect people from being pilloried, while at the same time not allowing religious bigotry and intolerance to fester. Indeed, what we need is to have protections in place that outlaw religious vilification the same way the Racial Discrimination Act outlaws racial hatred in Section 18C. Let me explain that. Section 18C came about in about 1995. No one even knew it existed until Andrew Bolt got hold of it. That's another, perhaps I'll take you down that particular story. We've had the Racial Discrimination Act since 1975. We signed it on when we signed on to the International Covenant Against Racial Discrimination. So we had, in fact, the Whitlam government brought about in 1975 the Racial Discrimination Act. 20 years went by and someone, I think it was Nicola Roxon, this was, as I say, in 1995. Yes. This was right at the end of the Keating government, because that's right, John Howard came in 1996. So right at the end of the Keating government in 1995, Nicola Roxon was the AG, and she passed the so-called Racial Hatred Amendment, which was inserted into the Race Discrimination Act as Section 18C, which basically said anyone who is humiliated on the basis of their race, not embarrassed was another word, humiliated or scorned or in otherwise vilified by racial hatred can have a remedy. It wasn't a criminal remedy, it was a civil remedy. No one knew anything about 18C. We just slipped in there, suddenly the government changed, and it wasn't until about 15 years later when Andrew Bolt was brought before the court when he made the comment, some of you may remember, about so-called fair-skinned Aborigines running the Aboriginal bandwagon. And these so-called fair-skinned Aborigines, who included some of the best lawyers in the country, challenged him, and they won. And Andrew Bolt went berserk in relation to 18C, because they'd used 18C to shut him down and have him apologise, which I don't think he ever did, and pay all their legal costs or something. I forget what the consequence was, but basically he had to kind of renounce what he'd said about these, about his comment anyway. So 18C. So then, in fact, when I'm just trying to think again, it's one of the policies when the Abbott government won government in 2013. I've got a feeling the Bolt case was about 2011, 2012. So when the Abbott government won government in 2013, they promised to amend 18C to get rid of it, because it had the effect of shutting down legitimate conservative debate like Andrew Bolt. However, when the matter came to the caucus of the Liberal government, they got soft on it, and nothing happened on 18C, because all these right-minded conservatives were saying, no, we just want to shut Andrew Bolt down, he's giving us a bad name. So 18C is still there. What I'm saying about this religious vilification is that I reckon you could probably have something in anti-discrimination legislation generally which protects religious belief in the same way that 18C protects against racial hatred, without necessarily having a religious discrimination bill. In other words, you can actually get the best of both worlds. That's kind of my answer here. I think the whole idea of a religious discrimination piece of legislation or religious freedom piece of legislation is just too hard. It's just not going to fly. Labor Party's not going to touch it. There's too many people who are against it, including right-minded conservatives. But if what you did was to have inserted into human rights legislation, or a Human Rights Act, which we don't have in Australia, some form of 18C which said that if a person is discriminated against on the basis of their religion, they have some sort of remedy. I think that would go some part to give that shield without giving the sword. How would that work in employment? Well, that would have to go before the federal court. Someone said, I was just denied employment in this school because I expressed a view that I was in a same-sex marriage and I can't get or I was tossed out of the school. Now, if that were there, then that school might have to come before the federal court and have that long argument, and there might be be some other things in the legislation that would allow, in some circumstances, that to occur if it was in defiance of the precepts of that particular religion. But that would be argued in court and we'd get some sort of compromise there. Mind you, why any person in a same-sex relationship would want to work in a school that actually made that a really bitter arrangement defies common sense. Why any young transgender kid would go to a school that vilified transgender makes no sense at all. Getting to questions any sense, it just would ideally finish. That's right. Well, that's true. So what we'll do is we'll come to the questions a bit later, but it just makes no sense at all. So that would be my answer to what you do with the religious discrimination. In fact, I wrote about that in the West Australian Law Review back in 2020. That would mean a bill that supports the position, a bill to change some other sort of legislation, and I'm thinking about a Human Rights Act, if that's ever going to happen, that's another debate for another day, that all faiths, especially those in the minority, cannot be subjected to discriminatory behaviours of vilification, and pronouncements from faith groups need to be subjected to the reasonableness test of fairness that they do not become discriminatory or vilifying. And that would be in employment or in acceptance of a student or a teacher in a school, etc. That's the way through this, because at the moment we don't have protections for people on the basis of their faith. We don't have those protections. This next slide talks about that. Let's scale back the bill or place it in another piece of legislation if you have to persist with the bill, but that's just not going to happen. It looks dead in the water. The Labor Party is not going to touch it. That matches the models of anti-discrimination law related to gender, race, pregnancy, age, sexuality and disability. Those are the six. Those are the six that are found in every anti-discrimination, equal opportunity piece of legislation in Australia at the moment. You cannot discriminate in relation to services, in relation to work, in relation to, what's the other one? Services, work, and there's another one. Education, that's the one. On the basis of a person discriminated against on race, gender, pregnancy, age, sexuality and disability. What I would do is have a Human Rights Act or go into all of those equal opportunity anti-discrimination legislations around Australia, federal and state, and add religious to that particular title. I'm astonished that it's not there just yet. But I think it was because it did open a can of worms about the ability of a person to express their Israel Folau stuff and complicate the matter that way. So, thus, religious bodies may then enjoy similar protections, all designed to promote human dignity. In other words, it can work, but you've got to be very careful, and you've got to have an open, democratic process. And if, to go back to that point I made right at the outset, that if what you are doing is so demonised by your ideological bent that you shut down that debate and say all conservatives are wrong, or all leftists have got too much or whatever, if you shut that down, we won't get anywhere. I'd like to think if we had an open debate about this matter, we actually could reach a consensus. The consensus is there if you follow that particular line of logic. At the moment, it's dead in the water because no one is going to move on their ideological bandwagon. A democracy would do that. So again, one of the reasons for not going down that authoritarian path, which Lord Sumption is worried about, is because it would shut down that debate. And if you shut down that debate, you simply won't get the outcome we all want, which is a human rights framework where people who are religiously based do get the right to feel they can't be discriminated against, by the same token are not given so much carte blanche that they can actually vilify other people in defence of their somewhat unusual religious beliefs. And there's a slide for question time. Now I'm just looking at my watch. We've been going about 45 minutes now, and I'm looking to see how our time frame is typically for question time.
Before we go to questions, please thank Rick for opening our eyes, opening our minds, and benefiting us with great wisdom. Thank you.
My pleasure. How long would you like to have some questions? What's your time frame?
No more than 10 minutes.
Okay, that's 10 minutes. We get a cup of tea after that?
Oh, yeah.
You
Oh,
do.
good. That's
Cup
what I
tea,
need.
cup of tea and a biscuit.
Let's have 10 minutes of questions.
And the only rule with questioning is make your question succinct and short. Don't give us your own full life history. Please remember other people and keep your question.
If you ever come to Writers' Week, you'll see me. Well, I love Writers' Week. I do a lot of interviewing there. And there's a lot of people who ask questions. They go on and on and on and on about that. say, can you get to your question and say, what do you think of that? That's the question. So, here we go. Questions, thoughts, reflections. And there's a microphone. Let's take my sailor pirate friend over here.
My question is focused on the statement of that
Lord Sumption.
Muslim fellow.
Oh, sorry, yep.
I'm not sure if you remember saying this, but you claimed he was an idiot.
Oh, no, Israel Folau.
Yes.
Yes, no, he's a Christian.
So am I.
Yeah. Yeah, but I was saying, no, I didn't say he was an idiot. I think I said probably his idiotic views, if I use the word idiot, idiotic views that somehow or other a Christian needs to say that all homosexuals, adulterers, fornicators are going to go to hell. So that was, it's a very odd 19th, 18th century view of some scriptural...
I'm not for what he said, but I can see his point of view, given that I'm studying theology. And in Revelation, if you really look at it, this is also long-winded and very difficult. It says that these things are bad, but I also come from a family where my family members are gay, and some of them are getting married. Congratulations to them. But if you love the person, how is that bad? And why? I understand that he should have said it better or altered it to a way where it wouldn't be demeaning for some, but I can understand his point of view, and I don't believe him to be an idiot. However, his actions were rather daft.
Well, and ultimately he was vindicated because he got back to the National Rugby League. It's an issue where a person expressing a particular view, now I'm a Christian but I don't have that view, progressive Christians wouldn't take that view, the whole idea of there being a hell in the first instance is a rather unusual view, but there are people who believe that on the basis of their literalism and looking at some levels of scripture. By the same token, if he does it in a way that actually demeans others, they should be protected from that demeaning, that's all I'm saying.
He should have worded it better.
It's very hard to word it better when you're saying that all gays go to hell. It's hard to rework that in a way which is actually loving.
Yes.
Except not saying it at all.
Anyway, or just keep to it.
Revelation, check this out, this is what I reckon.
Yeah, I don't think you find that in Revelation.
No.
It's typically in Leviticus in the Hebrew Testament.
Yeah.
Put that sentence.
Let's go to the next question.
I've got to go next.
I don't
So
hear the...
was there anybody else who had a question? Oh, I had one, but I got given this, so I've got...
Away you go.
Away you go.
Off you go.
Is that on?
Oh, yeah.
No, it's not.
No, it's not. There we are.
No.
That's
Thanks for introducing the King Charles to the debate. And
Yes.
I would like to be in the fly on the wall when he actually realises that he is an Australian. And there's a whole heap of issues that we could bring out there, but in particular, in line with your talk, is that it's not so much the legislature that may have become more moribund. For me, it's the old penal administration has re-risen and exerted themselves. And I said that in Victoria, the example you gave. They actually like being penal. And given King Charles's friends, his views are very much wider than the average Australian, I think. And he spoke about that. He's going to embrace very strongly pluralism. And specifically, I think, he's got people like spankers and things like that in his circle that are unacceptable in our laws. We've got fairly tight sexuality laws compared to the rest of the world, and also our marriage laws are fairly restrictive, especially in his situation. So, how does he personally reconcile that?
Well,
he's got to be lawful, but how does he feel about that?
Let me just clarify. He's not an Australian. He's the head of Australia. He's our executive head. So to that extent, he is sort of a titular Australian, but he's not actually an Australian. just come back to that idea of being a penal colony. That's probably a debate for another day about how much we enjoy being penalising people. That's my law and order lecture further down the way. And what was your third point? And in fact, our marriage laws are not particularly restrictive, except insofar as we don't have open marriage. I don't know too many places in the world that allow open marriage. For example, having more than one wife, polygamy. I suppose you can go to India and some of those places. But I don't think... but that's a debate for another day, I think, because in fact, in some respects, there are some aspects of Islam which allow plural marriage. Maybe in fact, if you look though, again, we come back to that census thing. Islam, I think, was 1.7%. If we had Islam around 50%, then you can understand maybe going to plural marriages. But at the moment, I can't see that happening in my lifetime or my grandchildren's lifetime. We're not going to go to that particular path. But other than that, our marriage laws are pretty much in accord with the whole of the Western world. Did you have another view on that?
I was aware of the Islamic situation, polygamy and things like that.
Well, but again, and child marriage. I mean, in some aspects of the subcontinent, child marriage was appropriate. We don't allow child marriage, and we don't allow serial monogamy. To say that, oh well, if I don't like you, I can marry someone else. We do allow that insofar as you have divorce laws, of course. But having been around as a divorce lawyer for many years and seeing very toxic relationships split and have two wonderful relationships emerge from that, I'm very much in favour of divorce to that extent. In fact, I'll tell you, I was studying family law in 1975 when the law changed. And that was an interesting perspective to see how the old law, and of course those of you who are old enough to remember, that's most of you, the old law was in order to get a divorce, you had to prove one of the grounds of divorce, which essentially were desertion, cruelty, or adultery. Oh, well called. Who said that? Margaret. And of course you then had to pay a snoop to go snooping around to see what your husband or wife was doing with the camera. I'm glad that changed. One of the interesting things was when we're having those lectures in 1975 about the way in which the new bill came in, the Family Law Act came in 1975, which was inspired essentially by Lionel Murphy and the rest of the caucus of the will of government. They said what will happen is this will just have a catch-up, and yes, there's a whole bunch of new things being put into the family court, because at that stage you only had to have irretrievable breakdown evidence by 12 months continuous separation. And all of a sudden, the family courts were just filled with people who'd been waiting for this legislation, and they were able to get their applications on foot. Everyone said it'll eventually die down. It never did. It never did. We're now at the point now where 1 in 3 marriages is ending under the new law. Is that a good or bad thing? It's probably a bad thing in terms of the kids being knocked around. Is it a good thing in terms of getting people out of toxic relationships? Yes. That's a debate for another day. But thanks for raising that point. But no, we don't have a fairly restrictive, I don't think, view on marriage to the extent that all we have to say is that you have to vow that it'll be for life to the exclusion of all others. It's been done voluntarily. In other words, it's not an arranged marriage where people are being forced into a marriage. And it have to be to the exclusion of all others. But of course, it can now be same-sex, which has actually brought us into line with many, many other countries around the world where that's been standard for decades. How are we going for time? Any more questions?
Any more questions? I have a writer for that one, if no one else has got any more questions. The other aspect of that was inserting the religious freedom. There's an anti-communist feeling, and your comment about the education system. South Australia had a very strong trade union education system through the University of South Australia's predecessors. That's all gone by the way now, and the federal government seems very anti about that. And in the New South Wales, for instance, they encourage building of churches only among 4 of the churches: the Catholics, the Presbyterians, the Anglicans, and the Methodists. We just snuck in, but there's the 5KA incident and things like that. So, are they resisting the religious aspects because it opened the door back to trade unionism and the JWs and those other religions that they've traditionally excluded?
I would say, without fear of contradiction, that none of that aspect politically has emerged in relation to the religious discrimination bill. Nothing about the JWs, nothing about Christian Delphians, nothing about anti-communists. nothing about trade unions. That has not infected this debate. The debate is all about the ideological divide between those who are in literalist, fundamentalist churches who are running schools and other educational institutions, wanting to say we want to determine what it is that we do in our schools and whom we have as staff members, whom we have as students. It's essentially schools that are driving this, nothing else. I wouldn't say anything to do with communism or anything like that. The JW issue, how are we going for time? The J is a very interesting one. Some of you may recall that during the Second World War, the JWs, they tried to, the Jehovah's Witnesses, they tried to outlaw Jehovah's Witnesses. And you might recall that the Jehovah's Witnesses were particularly under suspicion because, and it's the same with the Brethren as well, that when they avowed their allegiance, they avowed their allegiance to God over their allegiance to the country. And that was seen to be very worrisome during the time of war. And of course, there's a strong Germanic influence as well in relation to that, because we're fighting against Germany. So they tried to outlaw the Jehovah's Witnesses, tried to shut them down. In fact, at one point they had shut them down, saying it's now illegal to be a Jehovah's Witness. The Jehovah's Witnesses fought back, and they won. Not on Section 116, which actually failed. They won because the case was just poorly made out. The government just they'd overstepped the mark and hadn't proved their particular case. The High Court stomped on top of them. So basically, Section 116 didn't protect, that's the important point here, didn't protect Jehovah's Witnesses, which is one of the reasons why Section 116 really is a bit lame. However, they survived the Second World War, and I'm glad they did. I don't have much time for the Jehovah's Witnesses, but I'm sure they're wonderful people. I don't know too many, but I'm sure they mean well.
Okay, I think we'll call the question time to a halt. There are a couple of things that, excuse me.
That microphone is dying on you, is this my brother?
I push right up. It's turned up.
How's that?
That's better.
Just a reminder that Seminary of the Third Age continues next week, and our speaker will be Esmond Dowdy, talking on worship for postmodern times. The second thing I want to bring to your attention is these sheets that have been put out on your seats. We're asking for suggestions for speakers, topics, themes for next year's series of sessions of the Seminary of the Third Age. So if you've got any suggestions or ideas, please fill them out and just leave them on the table, and we'll take note of it. And Margaret, you've got one more thing to say.
Thank you. As you know, PCNet, or Progressive Christianity Network, which runs the Seminary of the Third Age, is part of the Effective Living Centre. And I put up a banner there. It fits very well with the things that Rick said tonight, with the human rights issues that he's brought up, celebrating the dignity and potential of every person for the common good of all. And so the Wilkes oration is, we've already had one this year, which was the Stan Grant oration that many of you were at. I know Rick was there. That was actually the 2020 and 2021 oration. Because of COVID, he couldn't ever get interstate. So we're having another oration, and we have a young woman who is a lovely young woman who works with the homeless people in the city, and she's had some very, very positive results with the work that she's doing at the Hutt Street Centre, and she's going to tell us about that on Friday the 21st of October. So we have these. If you can't come, maybe you'll know someone else who's interested in homelessness, and you can pass it on to them. But I do know that the Adelaide City Council, various candidates who are standing for the council, who say in their pamphlets that they're interested in the issue of homelessness, I've been to them and said, well, how about coming along? And they're all coming, the ones that I've spoken to. So I think that was a good thing. I won't say anything more, but please do some advertising with it for it, because we haven't got very many coming yet.
I'll place some notices on my Facebook and my social group with Discord Church, if you like.
Well done.
One more thing. Last week I handed out copies of invitations to come to the launch on Sunday night, the launch of our book, which we've done with the Aboriginal people, called Decolonising the Biblical Narrative. Their version of Genesis 1 to 11. It's a really exciting new approach. So you're welcome to come Sunday night, 7 p.m. at the Nanyara Centre. Okay? Meanwhile, I think we should say a very special thank you.